On the podcast today, we bring on Brian Keane of Prodigy Hockey. I already screwed up his name a few times on this. It's not Keane, it's Kane. But everyone else, look at the pronunciation. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong. That's funny. Super good guy. Really enjoyed our chat. Anytime you can learn a new hockey term, that's a win, because I feel like, at this point, you and I pretty much have down the vernacular, but Bendy is a popular term on this episode, and I think that everyone will really enjoy digging into that. I'm glad, Greg, that you clarified what that all meant, and it was, like I said, it was a large part of our chat, so really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's the benders of the game and the bendies of the game. I'll let you determine which one you want to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So, no, this is a great episode. I think we dug into a lot of topics that we could dig in even further. But we wanted to make sure we got through a lot of these concepts because they're so valuable for players. So I'm excited for this one. Without further ado, our conversation with Brian Keane. On the podcast today, we bring on Brian Keane of Prodigy Hockey. Really excited to have him on. He's doing some cool things in the hockey world, especially on the side of player development. Brian, good to have you on.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So get us started here. Give us a little background. I know you didn't exactly start in hockey, but now you're gladly in it. So what was that journey like?
Yeah, well, I played some college hockey at UMass, played for the Steel before that. And once I was done at UMass, played a couple of games over in the Magnus League in France, and decided that I don't have much of a future in professional hockey. So came back home and got a job with my old billet family, actually, in Chicago, and worked in marketing and advertising, and kind of lived in that world for a little bit and really enjoyed it, and learned a ton. And that kind of led me to a few other gigs, but all on the way was trying to build Prodigy up, and got into, doing small groups and lessons. And I always had the itch to get back into hockey at some point, and was really fortunate that I could kind of work a day job, but also keep doing the hockey on the side, and eventually turning into a full-time gig.
That's awesome. What led you to start Prodigy, and what were the early days like?
Yeah, so, I looked back at my career as a player and was just really interested in, why I didn't pan out, essentially. What was holding me back from playing professional hockey. At 16, 17, I was probably considered an elite player. I played on the Ivan Halinka team, which is now like the Gretzky Cup or whatever it's called. And so at that point was, probably in the upper tier of my age group at the 88 birth year, and went to juniors, had a great start, but then struggled, had a lot of adversity, then went to college and just never could really get my groove, and then ran some concussion problems, which is ultimately why I didn't continue to play. But yeah, I went back and just figure out, okay, if I could do things differently, or things I should have been aware of, or development wise, like what could I have done to put myself in a better position to maybe play some, pro hockey in North America.
Well, now you're kind of giving back through the Ryan Hardy experience. You've done that, I think, once or twice now.
Right.
And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about, is what do these kids need to know at the earliest of ages? So maybe go into, one, some background on why you think you didn't pan out, what was missing, and then two, kind of put that into what you guys are doing over at the Ryan Hardy experience.
Well, I don't know if we have enough time to go through all the things that why I didn't pan out. No, you know what? I think this is something that Ryan Hardy and the Steel are doing a really good job of. When you move up levels, you're going to have different challenges, and you're going to have different things that come up. And I was a player that was I learned my skills very implicitly. So I wasn't, I remember my coach in junior telling me, man, Kaner, you do this great 10-2 move. And I was just like, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're referring to, but thanks. I appreciate the compliment. But most of the things I did to solve problems on the ice, I wasn't acutely aware of. So once you run into some roadblocks where things aren't maybe going the way you had hoped, you do need some knowledge of the game to understand. It's to self-diagnose and then start to work through it. And then I kind of went to the very extreme end of that and started to become so focused on my techniques and things of that nature that I really was not integrated into games and focused on the right things. And, when you start to think about, oh, how does the puck feel on my stick all the time, or my hands don't feel great tonight, your attention can't be on the game and the problems you need to solve in those moments. So I finally found a role at UMass in my junior and senior year, and played it to the best of my ability, but certainly felt like I left a lot on the table as far as my technical skill was fairly high end, but my ability to apply that skill at the higher levels and anticipate and read the game, and I didn't develop those things along the way. And when you lose confidence, right, you start to think about some of those things more versus being in it and tuning into the right things to make good reads and decisions. And rolling into the second part of that question, I got that in, short amount of time. That wasn't too bad.
That was good.
There's more, but
I was just going to say, why don't we hold off on the second part? Because I want to dig more into that. What's your personal philosophy on how to bridge those two things, especially when you're working with younger players? Obviously, we want to focus on technical skills, but they have to be able to blend into a game. So, I guess just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that's, where this is all going. I think for a long time it was very technically focused. And now it's really about, you can't square peg round hole a technique into a moment. So how do you build adaptability and flexibility to perceive and see what's in front of you to take action on? So, and that's what I think you can, certainly you can isolate and focus on certain techniques to get feel and to build some confidence. But ultimately, I'm really interested in, can you be flexible, adaptable in moments that you're going to be in a lot? And how do we create those experiences for the players in practice to be able to work through that and solve it themselves with, support of a coach as a guide, as someone who can help facilitate that learning, versus, hey, you got to do this here or else, right? I want them to make the decision. I want them to feel consequence if it doesn't go right. But the environment and the drill is giving that feedback back, as well as me in certain regards.
All right, now we can jump into the Ryan Hardy experience. So I call it like a summer camp on steroids, but I'll let you maybe explain it better than that.
Yeah, Ryan, well, just selfishly on the coaching end, there's so many great hockey minds there. So just being able to kind of rub elbows with a bunch of those people, including Ryan, obviously, was a lot of fun for me and great for networking and learning. And then on the player side, I think he really gives a pretty unique opportunity to some young up and coming players to, have some coaching from, the Granados to Brandon Arado to Adam Nicholas to Belfry, you name it. Ryan has most of those people in his Rolodex. So that's a unique experience. And then you get to play and you get to showcase yourself too. And Ryan does a really good job of organizing and facilitating that for a full week, which, the kids get a lot out of it, have a lot of fun. And you can tell that they leave there with some good interactions and hopefully taking something they can take back home, keep working on, and also, get their name out there a little bit too.
Maybe what were some things that either one, you taught the kids or something maybe you learned as well, just rubbing elbows with other coaches and also these high level players, because it is invite only.
Yeah, I'd have to think back at some of the session designs, but for me, kind of going back to what we just kind of talked about a little bit, I want to put players in situations that they have to adapt and have to adjust and really make a skill or technique bendy in certain moments. So like we spent time on retrievals, we spent time on point play for D, we spent time on, you name it, it was probably covered throughout that week, But for me, that I want to put players and challenge them that way and have the challenge point be appropriate to help them, in the moment start to see some of those things and be able to take action on it. And then hopefully later in the afternoon, be reintroduced to some of those moments in the game and be able to perceive and take action on some of those opportunities within those moments. And then selfishly as a coach, like just chatting with, Adam Nicholas and Brandon Dorado and Topher Scott and Ryan, and you can go on and on. Like I took so much from those weeks. It really was a pleasure, and I'm very fortunate to have been included in that.
Bendy. I haven't heard that word be used in an ice rink in a really long time. Usually it's for the young ones and how bendy their structure is.
Right.
Can you maybe go a little bit further into when you talk about bendy? What do you mean there? And give some good examples for us so we can visualize that.
Yeah, the hockey context is probably not usually doesn't lead to maybe what I'm describing. But what I think of bendy is Austin Matthews changing the point of release through pressure at whatever the opposing D is giving, from stick pressure, angle, gap. Like, he has a solution. That's bendy to me. To most hockey people, I gotta sell that a little bit more, I think. But just being able to adapt, being able to, talking about, if we're going to go on Austin or whoever, but the players that can be in moments and be able to, whatever the D or the situation is presenting them, have solutions to. And I feel like players that aren't as skillful aren't able to provide solutions to those dynamic problems as well. So when I'm working with a player, I want to figure out, okay, where can we, based on your assets, based on things you do really well, what and the frequency that you're in those events or those moments, how can we make you more dynamic and send you, variation A, B, C, D of that pressure, and have you start to have to interact with it without knowing what's coming, depending on, where we are in that learning process.
Are there any common attributes you find amongst players who are particularly bendy or conversely aren't?
Yeah, they're able to anticipate better and start to take action. So they're not reacting to someone normally. Usually they're taking action, and like in Austin or Kaner or whoever, they're threatening something, whether it's space, a teammate, the net, and they're starting to move the pieces versus kind of allowing the D or the opponent to dictate their movements.
So they're dictating over reacting, and I'm guessing where you're going with this is they're putting players in situations where they've got to make decisions where it's a little awkward. They're kind of playing on the edge of that defensive coverage, things like that. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, I want to have an advantage, and if I can threaten something and make you move on it, I can predict in real time and read you better. Versus if I don't know what you're going to do, now I'm on my heels. I want to create predictability for myself so I can set you up or put you in a position where it's advantageous for me as the puck carrier or defender.
So when you say that, I'm thinking that we're going through routes here, like routes and habits, right? Those are the two things that help give predictability within the game. So is that kind of where you're thinking about, is like players that are bendy, they've got better habits, they understand not just their technical skills, but how to apply that and then be able to build off of like bridge points where you come to something, you have three options here, and based on what the defense gives, you take one of those three. So one, is that right? And then two, maybe touch on the importance of routes, habits, things that like, I know Brandon Saad, who's now with the Avs, I think that was something he really grew in with his game from early years, where he kind of just was almost hoping a little bit. And now it's almost, he knows what he's going to get and when he's going to get it and how often. And then he's able to better produce from that and be a better 200-foot player.
Yeah, I think for the NHL player, especially, and the high-end NHL player, you're probably going to have moments that you're in pretty consistently. The makeup, the color of those situations might be a little bit different. Well, they are going to be different every time in some capacity, right? But they have some similar makeup. So for me, what I'm talking about, the patterns and the habits that you have in those moments. I don't really believe in, like, I guess, patterns per se, but I believe in principles of what you're trying to do, having intentions or intentionality around what you're trying to do, and then being able to adapt on the fly, not going in with like, oh, I'm going to do this here and force it into, that moment. And that's what I mean by bendy or flexible is I can threaten something, and if you move on it, great. If you don't, I still can adapt to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. You're basically setting up a situation. You're not going to do something specific, but you're basically leading the defense into a certain situation. And then you've got 3 items in your repertoire, 2 items, or some kind of idea what you're going to do next based on where they're deficient, because no defense can cover everything all the time.
Yeah. Well, again, in all different situations, I feel the best players are able to keep options available, right? So it could be a pass option, it could be a pocket of space they want to attack, it could be the net, whatever it may be. They're aware of those things, and they're threatening them to then start to move that opponent. Now, if we're talking training or get like training, I want to put them in that moment with a little bit of that variability, so they have to actually read the D and adjust. So they don't really know what's coming, but they're trying to make it more predictable for themselves because of what they're threatening.
So it sounds like you're not a big fan of having obstacles or objects on the ice.
I think, there's a time and place for all things potentially, but I would say a very small percentage of, nothing I do is going to have an apparatus. But it doesn't mean that certain coaches can't get something out of that. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I believe, I believe that decisions are made based on opponents, space, the net. So if those things aren't incorporated in my change of direction or, escapes or whatever the technical thing you're trying to work on, if there isn't some sort of thing you can couple it against and read against, then it's not going to be as flexible in the game. It's going to be, I'm reading off a cone, which you can couple a movement with a cone, I guess, but it's not going to allow for the player to have interactions with what they're going to see in a game where, there's a human there that's moving, and you got to, on the fly, be able to read them and adjust, and hopefully start to move them like we've been talking about with that dictating movement.
Sure. I want to be sensitive to this because I know that you can't give away any sort of secrets or anything, but talk to us a little bit about how you approach building your sessions then.
Yeah, my sessions are, I study the player's game. I figure out areas that, they're really proficient in, and areas that maybe we can spend some time on. But I really want to know, like, what are they good at, and what do they do? What do they do really well? Let's keep improving that and make it more adaptable, dynamic. But everything I do is it's based on their gameplay.
So when you're talking about studying, like what are you looking for? Are you tracking stats? Are you tracking just patterns and things that you pick up? Or is there a systematic approach that you have, and how you like to go about that?
Yeah, I try to look at it from the first person's perspective and try to figure out, how are they thinking in these, what are they seeing in these moments to drive some of the action? That's what I'm really interested in. Then what scenarios, are, consistent for a player, and that they have problem, or have a problem solving. And then, like with the top players, you're just studying, players across the board. Yeah, I want to see what kind of solutions they have, and everyone has kind of unique, technical components that are fit their game and are assets. I want to find out, how are they using those, and I think to me it's important that, like, players understand that there's no there's a bandwidth for technical and for biomechanical that we want to stay in, and functionality. But each of these top players in the NHL have unique ways they solve things. So I'm always really curious to watch, like, the Ahos of the world, the Pasternaks, the DeBrincat here in Chicago, like guys that solve things uniquely. How are they doing it? And I want to kind of deconstruct that.
It sounds like video is a large part of, the not just the pre-work, but the ongoing work. Has that changed, as you've evolved, and like, what's your video setup look like?
I think just like, and that's why I was excited to come on the podcast. Obviously, I've read the website and listened to some of your other interviews, and I'm always trying to improve and look at things a little bit differently. I have things that I fall back to and really think are effective, but I'm always trying to push the envelope and look at things a little differently. Studying different defensive habits, to studying how people stick check, how people make contact with players in the wall, like what the different variations are. That stuff I look at, and I want to know, like, across the board, all these unique solutions that these players have that work for them, that might not be common.
So when you're looking through, how has your eye for the game changed, I guess, over the years? Have you started looking at the game one way and then just kind of rolling as you find new things that are interesting you, kind of change it? We had Daryl Belfrown. He was thinking the same thing. And he said at one point he was just basically watching the game through shapes and how shapes evolve. I'm curious what it is for you.
I think what I've become like recently, and hopefully it keeps evolving, just how like the best stick handlers and playmakers, how sensitive they are to pressure. That's something I've been really kind of narrowing in on, and how, when someone's on your shoulder, how calm some of the best playmakers are because of how they perceive and feel that pressure. So I've been recently really getting into, and I say recent, last few years, what builds that sensitivity to that pressure, and why are some of the best playmakers in the NHL, scorers, why are they have a higher sensitivity to stick checks or contact or what have you? Why are they so much better? That's what I've been trying to dissect more.
That's really interesting. I'm kind of curious. I was just talking to somebody today about how, COVID, nobody would have drawn up 2020 and 2021 to be like this. Is there anything that you can take from the last, 14, 15 months as, maybe if not a positive, but as something like a new best practice, something that'll impact the way you work going forward?
Probably Zoom.
Yeah.
Zoom was kind of I had, with players that we do video with, normally, we would have some discussion on the phone or after they've reviewed what we put together for them. But we've really integrated the Zoom conversation into what we're doing, and it's been great. And mostly because of the discussion, which has been huge to know what they're seeing, talk about what they're feeling in some of these moments more, and get more intimate with some of that stuff. That's definitely been a blessing for sure.
So you've been studying that pressure, you've been having these conversations. I mean, what are some things that, or maybe you probably don't have a set list of things that you've come to conclusions on, but maybe what are some things that are coming to light as you're having these discussions, as you're studying about contact, understanding the options, especially with these top playmakers?
Yeah, no, I think just the sensitivity to certain things, like I mentioned earlier, like, how can you be a little bit more calm to feel that contact, to know that, if I'm getting cross-checked and I can feel with my bottom head, I can get under that stick. Now I have a lane to get body position and get away. If I'm collecting a tough puck on the wall, how can I settle it quicker and then start to feel out and see over that inside shoulder to pick up where that pressure is coming from to make a better play. Just some of those conversations, and kind of mostly figuring out like why is that hard for you, and things you'd think were really hard for them weren't, and things that you thought were easy for them are harder. So just kind of becoming more aware of their, things that they need to become more aware of, or aren't able to like get comfortable within some of those moments to be able to realize and be more successful in those situations.
That's really curious. I'm a very cerebral player from my days. So
Just no
I would
skill.
100% skill, 0% physicality, I would say. And the skill wasn't good enough to go very far, but nonetheless, for me, it's very much a perception of space, and spatial awareness is always something I've found that's come very natural to me. Are you finding that at the elite levels, or kind of 50-50, or how does a different type of player perceive pressure, perceive space?
That's a great question. From what I've studied and have seen personally, the best players can pick up the most relevant task-specific information. Meaning, it could be space in front of an opponent, could be the opponent poke checking that top hand. The best players seem to be able to, over the course of their careers and through training, have been able to identify what the most important information sources are to make good decisions. So that comes from, task expertise and being in it a lot and having success. And then also, coaches that can guide and direct your attention to some of those information sources. That's what I see as far as, elite players and players that are heading that way, like how they're, developing.
Right. That is fascinating. Okay, I wanted to ask you about trends that you're seeing. Is there a skill or maybe skills that you found yourself really harping on in the last, I don't know, call it year or two or three, that was something that you, when you were playing, never really would have, worked on? And I guess as a quick follow-up, is there anything that you see maybe being eliminated from the game at large that we're still teaching that you're kind of going away from?
I think just, something that I've been on, and it can be expressed and executed in different ways. It doesn't have to be one way. I think that's kind of the main thing I've gotten away from, just trying to pigeonhole players into certain ways of doing things. But I think as a principle, being if you're possessing the puck, having it in a threatening position, and I call it the holster. Everyone calls it something different, but making players aware of how they can utilize that position to give themselves advantages. But yeah, I think that'd be one thing that I definitely did not utilize as a player that I wish I had in the toolbox or was more aware of back then. And I'm sure my coaches probably were trying to get me to do it, and it didn't click. But yeah, that would be something that, I think can be utilized by a lot of players, and something we definitely spent some time on. And then can you repeat your second question?
No, you're fine. I guess something that is still being taught that you're trying to do away with as you see the game evolving. Yeah.
Nothing that comes to mind right at this point.
That's all right.
I think just evolving how we train is, what I'm, and I think there's a big wave of coaches that are taking and applying some of the principles of coaching that I utilize and we do at Prodigy. But that'd be the biggest thing, like kind of getting away from isolated work unless it's absolutely necessary. And then there are times, for sure, it's a spectrum. There are times, but trying to help our players become more dynamic through putting them in scenarios and experiences where they have to problem solve and make plays and invite certain actions if we're working on a technical component, inviting that through our design.
All right, let's say you're watching a playoff game tonight, which I think we probably all are. What are you looking for? What's going on behind the eyes?
What am I looking for? You probably I don't even know if I'll watch it as a coach necessarily, and I just try to enjoy it. But I love figuring out how offense is created. So I'm always watching what's happening 10, 15 seconds, 20 seconds before that rush emerges. What's happening, in the defensive zone? What's the winger doing to anticipate the defensive team capturing the puck and then being able to carry it up the ice? Like, what are guys doing off the puck is probably where I spend most of my time when I'm watching a game like tonight. I'll be watching what they're doing off the puck to figure out who's going to end up with it and why, and what they're doing to anticipate it better.
So what do players that are good off the puck doing? What makes a player good off of the puck? I feel like everyone says, oh, they're not good enough off the puck, but maybe some specifics that truly make a player great.
Well, I think it comes back to some of that, some of the things we talked about earlier, as far as being able to anticipate what's going to happen. And like, if we just take that example we were just I was talking about, if I'm that weak side winger and the puck's in the corner and the opposing team has it currently, when are we going to win it back? And where do I need to be once we win it back? And where do I need to place myself, or 2 steps or 3 steps ahead to be available? And I think a lot of that comes with it, your scanning habits and your ability to predict, in real time or a few steps ahead where the puck's going to end up. I think you see that a lot of the best players seem to have a little extra quickness and speed, a little extra jump on some of those scenarios, because they're predicting at a higher rate than players that aren't as good at anticipating.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I guess my follow-up to that is, how do you go about teaching that? Is it through video? Because I'd imagine in small area or in small groups, it's difficult to work on, more 5-on-5 concepts, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I think you can scale that down. So like for instance, the scenario I was just talking about, you could have a 2v2 going on below, or 1v1 going on below the hash marks in the offensive zone. And you got to predict when your teammate's going to get it, so you are already in motion. So what are the information sources that are going to allow you to predict better? That's what you're trying to become more aware of. And that's where you can watch video is great for that too. But, I think, that's more knowledge of versus knowledge in the moment. Knowledge in is when you're in it, you're perceiving it and anticipating it better. And you have to become better in those moments. I think you need a lot of that exposure. And like you said, 5-on-5, it might only happen 3 times in a game or 4 times in a game. So we need to scale it down and place it in practice, so you get a ton of repetition without repetition. So you're in it, there's some variability, but you're still having to read it close to the way, not exactly the way you would in the game.
So you must be a small area drill connoisseur trying to create all of these environments. I bet you've racked your brain a few times over on creating some good ones there. So this will be a 2-parter, and that'll be on the back end of maybe how you design your drills and how you try to force things without making it static, giving that variability, making that player bendy. But first and foremost, starting with what you just touched on there, knowledge of the game versus knowledge in the game. What's the difference?
Well, I think, at least for me, knowledge of the game is, we're watching video together. We're we're declaring knowledge around certain principles, concepts. We're talking about it. We're discussing it. We're in class. Knowledge in the game is you're in those moments and you're seeing the pieces of, the player's weight shifting, the puck becoming loose, certain signals in the game that are going to tell you, okay, here's my next movement. And or with the puck, I'm faking to the right. I'm seeing that guy's weight shift. Now I know I need to go the other way, right? So those pieces, those signals in the game that are going to tell you what to do in the moment, that's, in-game knowledge versus knowledge of. And I think you need, like I talked about, I think earlier in the intro, I think you need a complement of both. I think both can be very helpful, but, there's a reason, certain NHL coaches, skill coaches, they know a lot about the game, but they can't get in there and make those decisions at that high a pace, right? In those moments. So that's the difference, right?
Yeah, and then it's about putting them in that environment and creating those drills. So that's where we're heading with the second part of the question is maybe how you go about designing those, and what are maybe some key elements that help you force players down the development paths that you're looking to get, so it becomes not just skill of the game, but skill in the game and being able to execute off those cues.
Yeah. So, for me, I don't want to force anything. I want to give them invitation A, B, C of how they want to solve it. And they're choosing it. But I've constrained it in a way that those options are available to take. So I don't want to force it if I can help it. I want to invite them to start to interact with it in that way. And hopefully they're going to solve it in their own way and build off of that. And then I can come in and we can watch some video, we can talk about it, knowledge of, and say, hey, like, let's consider this, or this is maybe how you can adjust here. But then just letting them put them back in it and keep working it and solving it. And there has to be a task goal. There needs to be an endpoint of what we're trying to do ultimately, where there's success or failure. So the little game or the activity we've created is giving them some feedback as well as, coach. And I talk about, like, for instance, like we've all played video games, right? When you first get on level 1 of whatever, you name the game, you usually don't feel too coordinated, right? You're kind of like, I can't really, if I played NHL right now, I'd probably be a little uncoordinated with with my fingers and all that, right? But all of a sudden you're on level 8, right? But because you've had an opportunity to be in that level over and over and over again. There's consequence because you have to restart, but you get the opportunity to keep going at it and learn. And you're not really thinking about now what your fingers are doing. You're just solving it. So that's kind of how I think about skill development a little bit. Is I want to create that experience for them, let them go work it. And based on how I designed it is going to invite certain techniques. And, and then we kind of, again, we don't want them to be a bender, but bendy in some of those moments.
Love it. Love that. Love that concept there. So based off of that, we're talking about iterations and continuing to find success and failure and helping that guide them. But sometimes results can be difficult to say, hey, was the process good that led to those results? Mm-hmm. How do you find the balance between that? And then how do you find your ability as a coach helps speed up the learning process through those iterations?
Yeah, well, I think, we constantly have to be tracking learning and behavior change. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a result in the game that we love. But if we're really fine tuning and going after certain behaviors that we want to evolve or change, it is, we can kind of see it emerging and starting to improve. But it's imperfect, and sometimes it's not easy to track or easy to, be able to pinpoint like, oh, we got it. And especially if you want to give players some autonomy and help them work through these scenarios, they may solve it a different way, which is great. And it might not be exactly the way you had drawn up. But hopefully that's where, like, the coach and the player, they're the protagonists. They're the most, like, it's their game, right? So we're just there to support and help them keep moving forward and give them ideas and guide them. But they're the ones that have to solve the problems and they have to express their athleticism and their style in a certain way.
That's awesome. I would say that you're a bendy coach. You're able to bend to the players. So we're going to say it's not just the players, it's the coach here as well, Brian Keane, who can bend with the best of them. Well, I got one last question here for you. And again, thanks for coming on. I think this was a enlightening conversation, and a lot of people are really going to take a lot from it. Especially because I like how you challenge players not into one specific item, but to make it their own. So that's really great. But with that, all of us coaches are a little bit biased. We all have the favorite thing that we like to teach and favorite skills or favorite situation we'd like to teach. Is there one or two for you that you just love digging in and doing? Obviously, you already touched on offense a little bit and how that's created. So I'm assuming your study then stems into how you're teaching.
Yeah, I love working on the offensive principles of play and allowing players to work through some of those moments. I think that would probably be my my go-to. I love working through and helping players become, hard to read and add deception and layers to their game that way. Those would be, I think if you ask some players I work with, that would probably be it. But I do try to, as much as I can, it's about the player and what challenges they're having to deal with every game. And that's where we land usually. But on the general across the board, I want to help players become more adaptable and harder to read and harder, to stop in the moments they're in and be able to play make.
Absolutely. Well, to echo Greg, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Before we let you go, why don't you, plug your work, where people can find you, your company, and any other parting words?
We have a Twitter at Prodigy-Hockey or actually at Prodigy Hockey. Whoops. Maybe you can put it in the show notes. I gotta go check that out. Make sure I'm giving you the right info. We also have a website, prodigy-hockey.com, where you can, work with us through video or come into Chicago and work with us on ice. But yeah, and happy to answer any questions anyone has on any of these topics. I talk with a lot of coaches, and I really enjoy talking about it, and I'm learning a lot constantly. I think that's the biggest thing. I've been doing this for 10 years now almost, and I'm so fortunate and have learned so much. And that's what I probably love the most about it. Just keep learning new things and trying to apply it. And I appreciate you guys, and I can see you guys are the same way. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Wonderful. Well, again, thanks for coming on. Make sure to definitely share all of these conversations in public. So everyone go on Twitter and tweet at them so we can all see and all learn and all get better. That's the whole point and why Dan and I started this, is to really help this game grow and get played in a much better way. And Brian's doing great work and everyone else. So thanks again for coming on, and we'll definitely have you on again for further conversations. I feel like we only scratched the surface on a lot of topics.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Hockey IQ podcast. We are Hockey's Arsenal, Greg Revac and Dan Dukart. Together we've come together to create a platform and a community to expand our hockey intelligence, hockey IQ, whatever you want to call it. We're very passionate about seeing this game played smarter and better and continue to develop itself to the next level and staying on the cutting edge of things. So you can find us at Hockey's Arsenal on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're also at hockeysarsenal.com. From there, you can find some resources and some options to work with us. We're excited to continue this. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, follow, and share. You can also join up for our newsletter as well, where we're going to tackle anything Hockey IQ related. So we're excited to have everyone here and continue to build.